Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 23rd of March 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to a special edition of UK Column News, and I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Now, what's happening in the country? Of course, it is the forthcoming referendum on the European Union. On Thursday, the 23rd of June, David Cameron is going to be giving us apparently a fair and transparent referendum on the European Union. And the good old BBC, as we can see here, has been kindly telling us all we need to know. Trust the BBC, you need look no further. But many people are deeply concerned about what's about to happen. And we need to return back to 1st of January 1973, when Britain originally joined the European Economic Community. And there were extraordinary events taking place around this particular event. And it's taken a gentleman called Dave Barmby to produce a really extraordinary book full of evidence to show how the whole procedure was hijacked and twisted in order to force the British population to join the European Economic Community. So will the same sort of thing be happening with the forthcoming EU referendum? Well, we think it will. And shortly we're going to encourage you to sit and listen as Dave Barmby produces the documentary evidence for the twisting of that previous 1973 procedure, which took us into the economic community. Pure deception on the British public, and here are some of the men in suits who were wielding the power in the background. Well, what sort of things took place in 1973? Here are just some of them. There was a propaganda campaign. MPs failed to tell the truth about their real intention. MPs who were against going into Europe were undermined. They were denied information. The civil service was used for political purposes. The European movement formed a Trojan horse, working deep within the corridors of power in UK. There was much propaganda material. There was a letter-writing campaign to the media. The BBC was particularly active in pro-EU propaganda, and a campaign was run within schools. Corporations supported the cause. There was a manipulation of the polls, and of course, the Prime Minister was prepared to lie about his convictions and intentions. Well, how can we be sure? Well, it's perhaps significant that Jean Monnet here said that Europe's nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding. Here it is from the horse's mouth. And now stay with us as we interview Dave Barmby to look at the evidence, the real documentary evidence showing a conspiracy back in 1972-73 to deceive the British public into joining the European Economic Community. Well, I'm joined today by Dave Barmby, who's now retired, a former chartered telecom engineer, electrical engineer.
Yeah.
And also a runner of some repute.
An old golden oldie, you would say, senior veteran runner.
Okay.
But I've given that up now.
You've given that up, okay. But you've done the long runs.
I've done long runs up to 95 miles. Must be completely mad, but I got a bit of a thrill out of the events.
Excellent, okay. Well, of course, the other thing that Dave Barmby has been doing is investigating the European Union, and in particular the origins of the European Union. Before I come on to exactly what Dave has been up to, we just have a little bit of a recap about some of the key figures, and we couldn't do that without bringing our very own Ted Heath on screen. This was an article from the UK column written some time ago, but there was a proposal to erect a memorial in Salisbury Cathedral, if I remember correctly, in the honour of the great man. Whether or not that was done, we don't know, but many people, of course, thought it was outrageous to even suggest it because of what he had done behind the backs of the wider UK public. Now, aside from Ted Heath, this organisation features quite a bit, which is the European Movement. And this again was a little comment from the UK column, talking about the origins of the European movement, taken from their website, saying in the aftermath of the Second World War, 800 delegates got going. So if we're to believe the European Union, everything they did was good. But once we dig in further, and we wanted to show this as a document, it'll be a little bit difficult for you to see on screen, but they're talking about helping the youth movement to support, finance, encourage, visit, bully, and expand our 63 branches. Now, there's been mainstream public press talking about the European movement itself, indulging in propaganda. We think that's true, and we're going to be having a look at some of the evidence. And we just remind people that over the many years, the UK column has been warning and warning people that treason has been afoot in the country. Britain sold out by our own politicians to the European Union. Latest on that, of course, is that we're seeing integration of Britain's military into a European system, the creation of the European Army. We were warning that the Navy in particular was in grave danger of this process, and we stand by our earlier reports. And we'd also had articles like this one, which was pointing out that when the Irish were involved in a referendum vote, of course, they were told you have to get the right to vote or there will be another one. So lots of shenanigans in the background. And Dave, you picked up today on the I newspaper here. This was the front page, and what you'd noticed is PM tells MPs not to be bullied by Eurosceptics. So this is a good place to sort of just start. What was the significance of this little headline? I'll just expand this. Yeah. This is showing this is a genuine email. If we just expand that, you should be able to read the...
Yeah, this email is a screen dump I made in February 2000.
Right.
This was before David Cameron was an MP even, but he was seeking to be an MP. He'd already stood for Stafford in 1997 election. Although he should have won it, he didn't, and he was quite anxious to become the MP for Witney, where I live. And we'll come to this in detail later, but he was in communication with a chap called Dr. Sean Gabb. Have you heard of him?
Yes, I have, yeah.
Sean Gabb at the time, in 2000, was very anxious to discover the credentials of prospective MPs, people who seeking to be a prospective parliamentary candidate, or PPC. Cameron was put down by Sean Gabb as a question mark on his EU credentials, on what he believed in. And if I may read the first paragraph of the email, which you can see, probably the readers will be able to read, but it says, "Dear Dr. Gabb, some time ago I sent you an email asking for my definition as a question mark on candidate list to be changed on the basis that I oppose the single currency and any further transfer of sovereignty from the UK to the EU." Well, if you remember, at that time we'd had the Maastricht Treaty, but the Treaty of Nice, Treaty of Amsterdam, and the European Constitution hadn't even been on the horizon. So there was a number of exchanges between Sean Gabb and David Cameron. Another remark that Cameron made, he says, "But if the question is, do you favour extending the powers of the EU," this is in 2000, "and thus reinforcing the supremacy of EU law, the answer is no."
We'll just blow this one up, yeah.
Yeah. So the email conversation continues. He said, Cameron says, "I'm not a lawyer, and perhaps my original email put it the wrong way round." So he's obviously trying to backtrack and correct
a little
things.
bit nervous.
Yeah, getting nervous. He really wanted to be classified as a Eurosceptic. It was important for him because he thought that people of Witney, Conservative Party, were Eurosceptics, which in the main they were. And he goes on and says, these are my views. No to the single currency, no to further transfer of power from Westminster to Brussels, and yes to renegotiation of areas like fish, where the EU has been a disaster for the UK. If that's being a Europhile, then I'm a banana. So I call this the banana emails. And you can see the irony with his position today. And we'll come to that conflict later on in this presentation.
Right, but very interesting to get a real snapshot there of what David Cameron had to say, and as you pointed out, significant that he wanted to be absolutely clear. All right, well, let's look at the meat of it. And you've been working very hard to produce a book, The EU, a Corporatist Racket, which you've got in front of you. Now, this book is based on the fact that some time ago, we can actually bring that up on screen, I think, if people want to have a look at that cover. You did a huge amount of research and into the original documentation around the movement into the European project. We're going to use that term because that's the term they were using at the time.
Was it?
And the book, which we'll come on to at the end of the discussion today, huge amount of detail, photographs of the original documents, so there's no guessing. The evidence is put in front of the reader. And the other place that holds the evidence is this CD, which you worked on extremely hard.
Thousands of these have gone out.
Right.
And you have to be patient. It's not an easy thing to study because there's 600 megabytes of documentation. It's got Hansard on it. It's got some broadcasts on there from the BBC explaining what had happened in the Cook report. And it's got the government records, which I got from Kew.
Right.
And you might wonder why I did this. Do you want to know what prompted me to do this?
I'd like to know, but I'm sure the audience wants to know. Why did you start doing it?
Yeah, well, this is slight digression, but I was listening to the BBC back in the early 60s. I'd just left university and I was starting work, and there was lots of broadcasts about how Ted Heath, he was doing the negotiations with the French mainly to get into the then common market, and I was following this saga, and everybody was getting quite excited about that we're going to actually join the common market the way it was presented, and I was very excited about the idea. And then I was on a skiing trip in Norway in February 1963.
Okay, very nice.
In the youth hostel, they announced over the tannoy that de Gaulle had vetoed our entry. And I can remember feeling very let down and disappointed. Now, why I felt let down and disappointed at that time, I don't really know, because I didn't know what's going to happen in the future. Anyway, so I then found myself working abroad for the next 15 years or so, and I found that we'd actually joined, when I came back to work in UK in 1979, I found that we joined this thing. I didn't think very much about it. Wrote into 1992, I think it was, when we adopted the Maastricht Treaty, and the Maastricht Treaty seemed to me to be a treaty far too far if you looked at the details of it. So I think I became an instant Eurosceptic, which is a stupid word because I'm not skeptic. I know exactly what I feel, but that's the terminology I want to use. I'll use it.
Right.
And then what you've got to remember is the records from 1970-72, which set out what was done to us, were buried away in the Foreign Office files, safe for the next 30 years under 30-year rule. You're not allowed to know what they were doing until everybody's forgotten about it. But anyway, I thought, well, how come the British people so easily gave up their heritage and all the rest of it? And I thought, I'll go down to the Public Record Office, since these records were then released under the 30-year rule. Right. And that's where I got all this stuff.
Right. So how long did you spend rooting out those records?
I went down there quite a number of times.
Right.
I also went to Oxford Library and copied off all of Hansard for the debates on first and second readings, second and third readings of ECA 72. For those who don't know what ECA 72 is, it's European Community Act 72, which took us in to the European Union, and we adopted the Treaty of Rome.
So that was the start of it. Now, this quote you were particularly keen to get up on screen because it was from Edward Heath himself. We will not go in without the full-hearted consent of Parliament and the people. What is it about this quote that motivates you so much?
The general election was called for May 1970, and obviously the Conservatives were very keen to win this. They were lagging in the polls by about 10%. Didn't look very good at all. So he made this promise before the election. He made it in Paris. He was talking to Pompidou. He made it during the course of the election, and it was repeated many times during the course of the campaign to get into it. Perhaps you could read it for me.
We will not go in without the full-hearted consent of Parliament and the people.
Well, that means we want the people who really want to go in and to believe in it. But unfortunately, Mr. Heath proceeded to bludgeon the people and Parliament into an unelected, undemocratic and autocratic corporate-controlled bureaucracy, which is the main purpose of this this presentation. I'm trying to show this. It's a corporate thing. It's not something that comes from our elected representatives.
Well, they've taken us, you're really in control of this. You've got a huge amount of evidence here, and we're going to say to people, we want you to stick with this, because the usual accusation is, of course, there isn't sufficient evidence. The problem here is we're drowning in evidence to show what went on. So just lead us through what's going on. We've got a newspaper article coming up next.
Well, when you talk about masses of evidence, that is the problem, because people have got a short attention span, and I do urge people who want to know how we got from there to here in such a short time to take time and study this brief excerpt. As I said, there's 600 megabytes of information on there, and you can get yourself a copy of this, and if you're interested in doing the research, and see the whole story. So these are just little excerpts. As I say, before the general election, it looked like the Conservatives weren't going to win it, but Ed Heath came out with this reassurance about we'll hardly consent, and we'll come back to this time. But also, I found a newspaper cutting. I tend to keep newspaper cuttings, which I'd forgotten about, and quite surprised me. Have you got this one up on the screen?
Yeah, ready.
The Mail, I think it was the Mail on Sunday, reported on the 19th of January 2003 that Geoffrey Tucker, who is Heath's Guru, had given £25,000 to a Labour official who had the Wilson's general election plans for 1970. And if you look at the highlighted bits there, you can see that Edward Heath, Tucker said the bribe was approved by William Whitelaw, Heath's chief whip, who went on to become the Deputy Prime Minister under Margaret Thatcher. And the article by Simon Walters claims that if it had been uncovered when Heath was Prime Minister between 1970 and 74, it would have almost certainly led to him being forced out of office, which is quite a big statement. So this, having the knowledge of the Labour Party's campaign, must have been very useful to them, and the net result was they just scraped in and became the party in power from 1970.
So we're talking dirty dealing here, bribes, huge sum of money. That's £25,000 at that time.
Well, I think you can multiply that by 20 to bring it to today's terms. What's 20? That's $500,000, is it? A lot of money.
So 500,000 cooked up with the Tories in order to do a dirty
Well,
deal.
this was done by Geoffrey Tucker, and everybody, of course, denies it or would want to distance themselves from this. But when Geoffrey Tucker was on his deathbed in 2003, he obviously either had a bad conscience about it or wanted to put it, well, as he said, he wanted to put it on record that this had happened. And that was reported in the press at that time. Geoffrey Tucker was a wheeler dealer, and he organised the breakfast in the Connaught Hotel, these famous breakfasts where the great and the good came along and plotted their
deeds. Well, we can hear more of those in just a minute. Yeah. So you've got this man, Geoffrey Ripon, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. A particular expression on his face. Well, every time I look at this, it's a very smug expression, I think. Tell us about this man and lead us into this now. That's funny
you should say that, smug. I think a lot of the people who are trying to take us in a direction that we don't want to go do seem to be pretty smug, and they if you get to talk to these people, they treat you like you're, they patronise you.
Yep.
I've been patronised. There's a number of pictures of characters here in this presentation. I'm trying to show the public the main characters through this campaign in 1771, so that you can get an idea of who was doing what to whom, so to speak. So
what's the significance of this man? He was...
Well, Geoffrey Ripon was the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster. I think you know something about the Chancellor.
Well, I think Letwin's in the same position at the moment, and I think this is the position that controls the Queen's money. But I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Well, he was appointed to. I think there's a role of the Duchy of Lancaster to move the motion in Parliament to adopt a certain bill. For the public who don't know, a bill is what precedes an act. Once it's passed through Parliament, it becomes an act. So the European Communities Bill 72 was led by Chancellor by Geoffrey Ripon. So he was the one who made all the speeches telling how good this project was. For instance, there was a lot of fear that we were going to lose our sovereignty. People who knew a bit more about it than the average public were fearful that we would give up all sorts of things. Ripon made a lot of comments in the House of Commons, and this is a typical one. He said in the second reading on the 15th of February 1972, and you can read it from the screen there, I said that there would be no essential surrender of sovereignty, and successive speakers on both sides of the House have agreed that there is no essential surrender of sovereignty. Well, if you believe that he was talking the truth, then, well, that's up to you.
Right.
Let me just have a little sip of water.
No, that's okay. We got it.
Definitely dry.
So this one goes on that we are not going to sign a treaty.
Well, you see, every section of the British public and organisations had to be wooed into accepting this was a damn good idea. And so we see Geoffrey Ripon at the Conservative Party conference in October 1970, and he reassures the Conservative grassroots by saying, "We shall not sign a treaty of accession which would commit us to the present common fisheries policy or to any arrangement which did not satisfactorily protect our legitimate interests." That's our fishermen. Now, if you believe that, then of course you'll believe anything. I mean, I don't think there's much of our fisheries left. The next thing reassurance he gave to the Conservative Party faithful is, "So it is nonsense to say that Britain will no longer be ruled by the will of the people's representatives," that's the MPs, or to put it in constitutional terms, by the Queen in Parliament. So there's all those assurances. So that's Mr. Ripon, who moved moved the motion. He was very prominent in the debates,
Right.
as you can see on the CD.
I'll just say to viewers and listeners that these we're showing on screen, to keep it simple, excerpts from the real document. So this is not a scrap of paper. This is an excerpt from the actual speeches themselves. And then we come to this man, Mr. Whitelaw.
Yes, William Whitelaw. He was a prime mover during Edward Heath's campaign in 1971-72. And his position was president of the council, but he was earlier the chief whip. His job seems to be liaising with the media to make sure that they broadcast the message that the Heath government wanted to put out.
So we just put the BBC on screen there because we're actually talking about them today on the UK Column News. So.
Well, this is the next one. If we go to the next one, this shows the relationship. To me, it shows pretty clearly the relationship between the government and the BBC. The BBC likes to portray itself as being independent, but that's a little bit, it's not exactly the truth. I think on the Telecoms Act, which governs the BBC, there is provision for the government of the day to lean on the BBC to put out the message they want, especially in times of war. So we see in this next slide Mr. Whitelaw being upset to hear that the BBC isn't putting out enough pro-EU propaganda. So Mr. Whitelaw says, Mr. Whitelaw said that he would have a word with the BBC about lack of cooperation on their part. Right. And of course, they are going to be a bit nervous because they have to have their charter renewed every so many years. And we saw that the BBC did pretty well come on side at the time. So that's all I want to say about BBC, unless you've got something to...
Well, no, I think we're seeing the same thing happen today, but that was BBC. You've got a BBC radio one here in this particular one.
Yes, the next slide is...
this is coming on to these Breakfast Club meetings. Yeah.
What I've got to explain to you is that after ECA 72 was passed in 1972, and we were in the EU, we had a follow-up report about how the campaign went. This is very revealing. There's about 70 or 80 pages. I think you've read that. It was written by Anthony Royal, and I've got several extracts from his report which are very illuminating. And on this particular slide, we can see the list of the people who attended the breakfast meetings organised by Geoffrey Tucker. We see here the editor of The Economist, managing director of ITN, the managing director of BBC Radio, head of the Current Affairs, BBC TV. These meetings took place weekly, and the politicians would be, and the European movement was always at these meetings. They would lean on the media and they would feed them the feeds they wanted them to produce. Right. So, as you know, what you see on TV is very influential upon people, and this is part of the proper
So the politicians are telling the public that they need to be fully consulted in the first instance, Mr. Heath's quote, and then what's going on in the background is that we're having these regular semi-secret meetings at the Connaught Hotel.
We didn't know about these meetings until the Cook Report in 2001, I believe it was. Right. So we didn't know about it until nearly 30 years later. Right. So it was all. So when you use the word secret it was. If it had got out, there would have been a real fuss. And there's also a question of who paid for these things, because breakfasts at the Connaught Hotel don't come cheap.
And somebody had the money to grease the palms by that mean.
Yes, well, Geoffrey Tucker was interviewed by Cook on the Cook Report, and when he's asked about it, he becomes very cagey. He pretends he didn't know. Of course, he damn well knew. He was organising the whole thing. The next slide, unless you have something more to say about that, the next slide is also from Anthony Noyle's post-campaign report, and he's concluding that the campaign was very, very successful. He said it produced the desired tide of public opinion in favour of going in, that is, at the right time. Now, as you know, timing on things is very critical. We had the Parliament's first debate in autumn 71, and the public and the Parliament had to be on side for that debate, so they'd vote to go in, and they did vote. And if we go to the next slide, this is quite a, I shall refer to this once or twice in the future. This is also from Anthony Royal's post-campaign report, and it shows a graph of the poll of polls. If you don't know what poll of polls is, they take the average of all the polls that's happening and show the results. And if you show, you haven't got the arrows on this one.
Well, we can bring those in. Yeah.
Right. In February 1971, this is quite amazing to me. In February 1971, only 20% of the population, British population, were interested in joining the common market, and over 60%, you can see there, were firmly against going in. Well, this is before the campaign, the propaganda campaign got into full swing. And by the summer, and you move the arrow to early September, you can call that summer, I suppose, you can see that the two sides are neck and neck. And this shows how shows the result of the propaganda campaign. A good friend of mine used to run a post office and sweet shop, and he told me once that when there's an advertisement on television for confectionaries like Mars bars, he finds afterwards his sales of Mars bars have gone up by fourfold, but that only lasts a few weeks. And I think that demonstrates, I mean, if you have a massive propaganda campaign like that, which is secret and hidden, and the other side and those against are being got at and neutralised, can you really say this is, if you can go back to slide number 11,
slide 11.
Yeah, just to reiterate.
Right, for that,
yeah,
for the quote, the famous quote.
Yeah, I'm going to keep coming back to this because can you really say that Heath was running a campaign in which he was going to get the full-hearted consent of the Parliament and the people? And what I mean is with their willing support, not their brainwashed support.
So we've got secret meetings, we've got a campaign being run to influence the editors and the news reporters.
Before we leave this chart, the third arrow, you can see the effect of propaganda is only short-lived. By mid-October, you can see the position on the polls was reverting to its original, begin to resort to its original position. 2 months later, only 32% of the population were for going in and 40% against.
So we've got secret meetings, we've got senior government ministers influencing what the public are being told. We've got the public being driven by the polls. And you've now got this organisation, IRD, which is starting to manipulate.
Yes.
What is this one?
Well, this again was a secret department at the time of the East campaign in 70, 71, 72. IRD turns out to be Information Research Department, quite harmless sounding title, but it was anything but. It was run by, the next slide, by Norman Reddaway.
Mr. Reddaway himself.
He's a very secretive figure. You won't see much about him on the internet. I managed to get this shot of him by getting off a movie film, off a video of him during the 1960s campaign in Indonesia. Have you heard about the Indonesian campaign in the 1960s?
I haven't in the detail to
Well,
be talking to the audience, so tell us.
well, Indonesia was a self-governing country in the 60s, well, it still is, and it was run by President Sukarno. And he was elected as president in a proper way. But the United States government and the British government didn't like the way he was ruling his country. They thought he was too socialist. So the decision was made to remove him. And this is a common sort of thing that happened. You had it sort of in Chile and so forth. And Redaway was the British effort, and he was placed over there, working in tandem with the CIA. And they put up a chap called Sukarno. Suharto. Suharto, do you remember his name? Anyway, he was going to be the one who was going to replace Sukarno. But there was all sorts of dirty tricks played there, and that resulted in a bloodbath, tens of thousands of ordinary innocent citizens killed. So this is the background of the person who was fronting our IRD part of the campaign.
But it was we shouldn't worry because it was only information research. As the
Oh yeah, everything. I've noticed the titles they give to things are
very
quite
soft.
often they're quite often the opposite of what they call themselves.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that? I can't think of any other examples right at the moment, but we'll probably see some later on.
Right, so now we're getting into some really serious documentation, all on that CD. So if you're thinking, I want to see the actual documents, then getting hold of the CD will give you that. But this is where it's starting, in my mind, to get very
Do you want to read that one for me?
Yeah, well, right, this is a Redaway IRD memo directing activities by confidential brokers. And it's what it's saying is that it says we've made a useful start on discreet support for the approach to Europe. Mr. Budd's liaison with publicists, Mr.
No, don't read it all, just item
Okay.
A.
Okay, so that goes down to A. The discreet promotion of letters to the press through confidential brokers should now sharply increase.
Yes, now what does Redaway mean by confidential brokers? Well, what he means is the letters column in the various newspapers are going to be bombarded with letters purportedly from the public, showing how the public is so much on side of joining this common market. But who wrote the letters? Well, it was his damn department who wrote the letters. But he, obviously, being a civil servant in connection with MI5, by the way, he couldn't have his men signing the letters. So he used confidential brokers, and it was usually on-side MPs, members of Parliament, and members of the European movement. The letter to the Times will show you that these letters were signed every Wednesday in a basement off Sloane Square. And they come along and sign, the MPs come along and sign the letters as though they'd written the damn things.
Right.
But it wasn't written by them, it was written by the IRD.
And this is a propaganda campaign, isn't it, being run here? Because these are deceitful. This is a deceitful process in order to skew.
See, propaganda in its proper usage isn't a bad thing. There's no harm in explaining to people, but this was to take away the sovereignty of the people and the freedom of the people. This what was going to happen, as we've seen, what we have today, and so for them the means the end justifies the means.
Yeah.
But the means was totally what's the good word?
Well, it's deceit, isn't it?
deceit and disgraceful. We have another one. This
This is another Reddaway
another one from Mr. Reddaway.
which you've correctly said, brainwashing the public. The message, he's saying the message should be coherent and simple. Repetition is essential. And sorry, can I just, because it's there on screen, Dave, the fact it says it should be conveyed at two levels, i.e. the high political, Britain's role, and the low detail, individual anxieties and opportunities. So this isn't some casual campaign. This has actually got thought behind it.
A massive orchestrated campaign.
Yeah.
Not for the benefit of the people, as we've now found out. Yes, the word repetition is essential. What do you see in that?
Well, I only know that this is the way you get information across, by keep repeating something simple.
Wasn't it Himmler, was it, who said if you repeat a message...
A lie often enough, they will believe it.
That's it.
Yeah. This is presumably why the BBC is reporting the news every hour. Well, maybe.
Yeah, I never thought of that. Yeah, well, I don't listen to it. It bores me to death.
I listen to some of it because it alerts you to what's going on. But you say this is information being drilled into people's minds, and it was happening there. And we've got another organisation, the European Communities Information Unit. It's all soft sounding, isn't it?
Where are we now?
So it's this one here, isn't it?
Yeah, EICU.
Yeah.
Well, IRD was just one of several departments. The Foreign Office seemed, if you look at my book, I think I list about 6 departments that were set up to propagandise, to get us into the common market. And EICU is one of them. It stands for European Communities Information Unit. Fairly harmless sounding name, but they seem to be tasked with liaising with the media. If you want to read number 3 out for me, well, I take a drink.
You okay?
Go on.
Okay, so 3 says there is no problem at all with BBC TV Scotland. All of those involved in news and current affairs are pro-marketeers, and we can depend upon them to press for as much time as possible.
Well, we're all told BBC is independent and impartial. How many times have we been brainwashed with that? Well, that contradicts that, doesn't it? What's number 5?
Number 5 says, I've written to the regional organiser of the European movement in Edinburgh, telling him of Sir John Marjoribanks' forthcoming engagements, and no doubt he'll do all he can to help out publicly. Yeah. So north of the border, I find this very interesting that we've got a powerhouse, a recognised powerhouse north of the border with BBC Scotland. And you're quite right, the BBC is being used here in order to put out what is pro-EU propaganda.
When you say used, they weren't being used. They, according to that, they were... there's no problems with them. They were completely onside.
They were complicit.
Complicit. They were colluding.
Colluding
is a good word.
Yeah.
Yes. Just one point on 5 is, you notice the mention of the European movement. As we go through these documents, the European movement appears time and time again. They were essential, absolutely essential to Heath's effort, because they portrayed themselves as grassroots, you and me, ordinary people, demanding that we join this common market, otherwise we're finished. And unfortunately, the European movement was not a grassroots organisation. It was initially proposed by Churchill, but it was only an idea, and it was taken up by the Americans through a character called Joseph Rettinger, and they thought this European movement would be a good thing, and they set up something called ACU, American Committee for United Europe, and they funded the European movement back in 1948. So they got massive funding. European movements were started in every country in Europe except Iron Curtain countries. The one in Germany was fronted by Joseph Hermann Abs. Have you heard of Hermann Abs?
I have, yeah.
Well, Hermann Abs was Hitler's banker during the war, and he escaped being hung after the Nuremberg trials because he knew so. He was a top banker. He was the director of Deutsche Bank during the war, and became director after the war. And he had friends in high places in Britain and the United States, so he was safe in the gallows. And he's the man who started the German European movement.
Right, so we've got a very powerful European movement working in the background. You're mentioning the links through to CIA and MI5. All we're really saying, I think, for this in this interview is that those sorts of people were manoeuvring in the background, but we're looking at the evidence of what was being done. So this one is EICU again, planning an information brainwashing campaign in the UK and overseas. Shall I just read the highlighted bits into the screen? So the first one says, the programme for such speakers should concentrate on constituencies represented by MPs who were doubtful about entry. The programme for speakers should concentrate on constituencies where the MPs were doubtful.
Well, what's behind that, of course, is Heath and his cohorts were not interested in a free and fair campaign, and contrary to what he says, he wasn't interested in the full-hearted support of the people. So if any MPs were, his own MPs mainly, were against the policy of joining the European Union, these MPs would be targeted in their own constituencies, and we'll see details of that later on.
So this is a very, very critical thing, isn't it? Because MPs who were trying to do the right thing and express the views of their constituents were to be targeted by their own party and its agents in order to undermine them.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And
well, the read F, there's a bit more about the same thing.
Right. So the paragraph F here: a campaign of letter writing to MPs by constituents must also be promoted. This is absolute blatant manipulation of right.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I mean they're going to find supporters. You'll find people who'll do anything for a bit of money or a couple of drinks or something. And so they would, within the constituency, get some Joe Bloggs to write to their MP, saying you're on the wrong wavelength. You know, you should support Mr. Heath and so forth. And this went on in all sorts of constituencies. Right. You could imagine the MPs feeling a bit sort of miffed if they're getting a lot of these sort of letters, and they begin to think, am I really right with my ideas? But I don't think the idea was to get the MPs to change their mind. It was just to stop them campaigning, get them
make them uncertain.
Make them uncertain and neutralise them if possible.
Right, but we're talking a form of psychological warfare here, because people are having their minds and their views and values attacked. This is very, very sinister.
I mean, if I look back to the 1960s, I thought what a wonderful thing this was to go into the. It looked pretty good at that time, and I was certainly brainwashed into thinking it was a good thing, and I remain brainwashed into the Maastricht Treaty. Right. So I'm quite a deep-thinking person. So if I'm brainwashed, what about the average person in the country?
Yeah. Right. Okay. So where's this one taking us? We got to the
right. We come to another department called IAD. As I said, there's about six departments set up to propagandise that I have been able to identify. IAD was the Information Administration Department, and they seem to be the people who handle the money to pay for the campaigns and all the sorts of things. So perhaps you could read what they wrote about visits.
Well, the para 10 here says the visits section of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office Information Administration Department launched a major programme of 1,000 visits a year from Western Europe. I'll read the rest of it if I may, Dave. It says these visits were aimed at creating a favourable climate of opinion in Europe and at the same time helping to educate domestic opinion about Europe. And then it goes on to say the Foreign and Commonwealth Office annual grant of £7,500 to the European movement for its own visits programme was topped up several times, and smaller donations were made to a number of other organisations.
Well, this was on top of anything they were getting from the CIA. And it's been revealed in files in Washington that the CIA handed lots of money over for this campaign.
But these are big sums of money. People may, thinking £7,500.
Well, I think you got to multiply that by 20, but they were getting money from all sorts of different directions. They were getting money from big corporate business and so forth.
But
so they were not short of money. They could do what they got as much as they wanted.
They got as much as they wanted to be sending out letters, to be moving people on visits. And this is using the public's own money effectively to run a programme to deceive them.
Yeah, they were being bribed with their own money, as they say.
Yeah. And IRD here, this is Mr. Redaway again, had to target every part of society. So interesting, and this shows you the quality of these documents because this has got a secret stamped at the top and many of the documents are released declassified documents. So between September 1970 and October 1971, IRD kept up a steady stream of letters and articles to the press, working closely with the European movement, and also drafted the replies to over 2,000 letters from the general public. And then the next one is activities in schools. So
let's just go back to 15,
yeah,
and then we'll talk about schools. Well, they were not happy with just putting their own message across. They had to try and destroy the opposition. That's people like you and I's message. And any letters that the public wrote in with good ideas, there was a department, the department was set up to immediately send in a letter to counter any letter from the public. So the opposition was effectively neutralised throughout the campaign by this sort of activities when it comes to schools.
Just before we go into the school, just to ask a question here. We've named some people. We've named Heath. We've named Mr. Redaway. How do we do this? Was there an organised cabal at work amongst the senior politicians, or was this looser?
I think it was pretty loose sort of organised. These main characters all had the same objective. They just naturally worked together. They'd probably been to the same schools and socialised a lot.
Right.
And they were chosen for their being totally on side and having not having any scruples, being ruthless. And you can see these people were of that nature.
Right.
And so I don't think it was a sort of plan for a long time. It just naturally fell into place. That's my opinion.
Okay. So they were into the schools as well, wanted to get the children.
Well, you can see no stone was left unturned. Every section of society had to be propagandized, for want of a better word. And the European movement commissioned education products. They received the money from the government and where else to produce publications, and they were flooded around the schools. I suppose the sixth formers might be voting on the going in, or at least they would influence their parents. If you could imagine that kids come home from school. Look at this, Mummy and Daddy. We've got to go in, and Mummy and Daddy said, "Oh, we don't want to go in that." And you can see the arguments that resulted at home, and some parents would be convinced of it. That's a viewpoint there.
Right, and
where are we now?
Well, this
can I just stop you there a minute? I've got to say there's probably far too much material here, and to go into every one of these will take a lot of time, but we can try and dwell on them as much as possible. Well, skip through them so we don't bore the public too much.
We can go as fast or slow as you like. But This one that I'm able to read on screen for the audience
read it,
can see. That this is very important, I think, because we're reinforcing the fact that money was no problem. The contribution will need to be extremely discreet. Unattributable support for non-official people promoting our approach to Europe. I think this is just absolutely evil. Public money, the contribution will need to be extremely discreet and unattributable. And then it says IAD have substantial funds for visits and lecturers. And it goes on to say, e.g. the foreign editor of the Daily Mirror, the editor of the Times, and certain television producers and commentators, certainly pop stars, student leaders. So money was flooded in order to get this pro-European propaganda moving around. And just let's bring this one up as well here. We've got, you said the Maestro himself signs a memo advising on the use of CRD and EWCS.
These are two more departments of the 6 or 7 I've identified.
Right, so this is Redway himself. And we've got town twinning here. That's something I've always been fascinated, that suddenly we've got all of these twinning programs operating. Big money, you've told me, behind that.
Well, we'll come to the money, I think, a bit later on. But money was no object. But surprisingly, when it came to the space program, they cancelled Black Arrow because they said it was costing too much, it was a trivial amount.
Right.
So they haven't got enough money for our industrial program or space program. They've got plenty of money to propagandise the people and deceive them into accepting something which, accepting the unacceptable, effectively.
And nothing's changed. In fact, it's got worse.
Oh, yeah, because they're far more skilled at this sort of thing. They have lots of electronic tools available. Town twinning, as I understand it, town twinning first came into being after the Second World War, and it was a bona fide outfit to quite rightly promote exchanges between different countries after the war. But unfortunately, it got captured by the government and funded. He who pays the piper pays the tune. They expanded the twinning organisation, and there were a lot of exchanges.
Right.
And I've been in the twinning movement. My wife is French Canadian; she's part of the twinning movement, and I went to France a couple of times, and there was a massive propaganda exercise there, saying it stops wars and all this sort of thing. It was not what it seemed to be.
Right.
And we come to the money side of that a bit later. There's another thing here about pamphlet production. IRD produced pamphlets in liaison with the good organisations and chosen publicists. So it's all hidden away, discreet people. The public didn't know what was hitting them.
Okay. Well, you say which ones you'd like to cover and which ones
I don't
move
want
on from.
Obviously, a presentation of this type is quite technical and requires. You can't get the message across without going to the technicalities, but so I hesitate to go through in detail with each one. But let's carry on, shall we?
My view is that this is factual evidence which people have never seen, and we've got the opportunity to get it up on screen.
Yeah.
If you can give us the time, I would say,
because the viewer can always, if it gets bored, can move forward a bit and come back later or whatever. Yeah.
I have a feeling that people aren't bored with this because this material has never been shown in this way before. So I'd say, Dave, stick with it.
Right, go, stick with it.
Go on then. So we've got proposal to cooperate with the Britain Out campaign. Overruled.
No.
Overruled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what we had, obviously there was a pretty ineffective campaign to fight this thing. There was very little money available, but we had a organisation called Keep Britain Out. Excuse me a minute. I got a pain in my leg.
Okay.
And this Keep Britain Out was headed by Frere Smith, And he wanted to know what we were getting into. He wanted to know what the documents said, what the treaties said, the Treaty of Rome, and all the legislation that had happened since the common market was first formed in 1957 until 14 years later in 1971 too. And so he wrote to the government and asked for various documents. And here we see Mr. Simcock, who was, if you look at the subscript at the bottom there, was proposing to his supervisor, Mr. Slatcher, that we provide the information you require. But Mr. Slatcher thinks it's not a good idea at all. Perhaps you could read out what he said.
It said, in view of Mr. Frere-Smith's notorious anti-market activities, it does not seem incumbent upon us to tell him the full story of the adaptation of secondary legislation to British requirements, nor of the preparation of authentic English texts of community legislation. The draft is therefore the least we can say. So this is blatantly withholding information from people who...
From the public,
from the public.
And they had a right to know, didn't they?
Yeah.
So again, if you go back to slide 11, if you want to flash that up, I ask you, was he being honest?
Well, as we go through, of course, no way is he being... Well, we're being honest with this one. Okay, right, so... Let's see if we can follow on through.
We're carrying on in the same vein here on the attack on the opposition, the side that thought that going into the common market was not a good idea. And here we have one
with Mr. Powell.
Mr. Powell. Now, Mr. Powell, of course, upset a lot of people with his Rivers of Blood speech, which I think was ruined his career. It was pretty inadvisable for him to do that. But anyway. He was a linguist. He spoke several foreign languages fluently, and he went around Europe to tell the people in Europe what Britain's position was, and that we thought we shouldn't go in and all the rest of it. And he went, as you can see from this memo, he went to Turin, but the government tried to forestall this by sending in
Mr. Craig.
Mr. Craig, is it? Where is it?
Yeah. I have asked HM Consul in Turin, Mr. Craig, to attend the lecture as a silent observer. So this is devious as well.
And to go to any other functions. And then the next highlighting there is, I therefore sent Mr. Adi Conferelonieri some general briefings, including ideas for a couple of awkward questions. So he was going to try and spoil Mr. Powell's speech.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. So the idea is not being put across to the public by over promotion of the EU. We've got dirty tricks going on behind the scenes to actually block and stall people who've got a different opinion.
Now we see the next slide. Mr. Powell was back in the UK, and he gave a speech in East Ham. And the government missed a trick, or at least the department controlling Mr. Powell missed a trick, because he made the speech without any opposition. If you want to read why there was no opposition, and the anger of Mr. Adams over this lack of opposition.
Well, they didn't get to know, basically, what he was going to do, and they say this is a bad state of affairs, and I think we must now insist that the Conservative Central Office and Labour Committee for Europe let us have advance press releases by anti-Europeans in their respective parties as soon as they can get hold of them. Had we been given Mr. Powell's speech, we could have inserted a rejoinder in Mr. Rippon's speech yesterday. So they want to get hold of things in advance. If you're going to say the wrong things, they got to know.
Yeah, they got to know, and then they can try and offset it, or even stop it.
So we bring in another man here then.
Just before you pass on to that one, we've got the use of the word anti-Europeans, which is purely pejorative, isn't it? It's showing a bias in to anybody who doesn't agree with their point of view.
Yeah.
And they use that word today, anti-Europeans. Well, we're not anti-Europeans, are we? Are you anti-European?
I'm not anti-Europe, no. If
No,
it's European Union, but not anti-Europe.
Yeah, exactly. There's a distinct
European,
difference.
yeah.
I mean, the Russians are Europeans, are they not? Are they? Most of them are. I'm not against Russians, are you?
No.
No.
So this is playing with the language to get their advantage in, isn't it?
Yeah. What they mean is they're anti-EU, anti-EUites. But they've got this vocabulary of language which is deliberately fostered to try and make us look silly.
Because you can control if you control the language, you can control
George Orwell?
Absolutely. So we've got Douglas Hume, Foreign Secretary, coming up next. And and you're talking about Jean Monnet here,
well,
so we're getting into the heart of the beast.
Well, Douglas Hume had been Prime Minister, but he lost the power to Heath, but he was appointed Foreign Secretary. What you've got to know is all these documents that we're bringing up come under his department, Foreign Office. He was the Foreign Secretary, so he condoned all this stuff. Right? And
he must have known it was going on. There's no way.
Well, no. Look, if you're captain of a ship, you were in the Navy. If the ship sinks and somebody down the bottom and drilled a hole in the bottom, still the captain's fault, isn't it?
This is
right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Anyway, where are we now?
Well, this is where we've just
this is the Monnet
and Monnet.
Now we're coming to Jean Monnet. I think a lot of people have heard of Jean Monnet. He was another of these characters who operate behind the scenes. He's not an official of anything, really, but he was prominent in promoting the European coal and steel community in the early 50s. He would promote the ministers who were in favour of this sort of thing. And when it came to Britain joining, he was very keen on getting Britain into this thing, and he was given free access to the corridors of power in Whitehall. He was wandering around the corridors and seeing who he liked, and and you can see from this the tone of this letter to Monnet, if you want to read it out.
It says, "I've discussed this with Geoffrey Rippon. I hope you will forgive me if I do not attempt to comment in detail on the wide range of proposals contained in your paper, but I would like to say how much I agree with the method which you recommend should be followed in promoting the process of European unification."
Well, there's 2 points here, isn't there? One is the deference he's showing to Monnet. In other words, Monnet, we bow down to you, your great judgment. And secondly, the mention of European unification.
Yeah.
Now, so they knew what this project was heading towards, but they didn't tell anyone publicly, as we see in item 11 there. We will not go in.
Yeah.
He didn't say what we were going into, but we were going into an integrated
unification,
which I may say is a Europe run by corporations. It's a corporate project. That's the whole thrust of this presentation. It's a corporate project. Europe is just a symptom.
Yeah.
Right? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Yeah. So we've got Monnet, as you described, walking around the halls of power, talking to whoever he liked, and then we've got whose project is this? If I've got this one right, this is the Conservative government on the presentation of our case. So the quote is, "The presentation of our case is being coordinated by..."
Yeah, what this is showing is nothing. This is generally just showing who was actively involved.
Yeah.
We've got the European movement appears time and time again in these papers. We've got the British Council. Well, you expect the Conservative group for Europe to be pro. That doesn't matter. But the British Council, should that be active in propagandising? The British Council's job was to help education in developing countries, wasn't it?
Well, and promote Britain overseas. But yes, where did suddenly the promotion of Europe come out of their role?
Now, the point about the European movement is, as I said before, they were attending all the government planning meetings, all these papers, time and time again, talk about the European. What business had they been brought into the corridors of power? Right? When they were actually a corporate entity, a corporate product, initially financed by the American corporations and banks. Yeah. That's the point of that one.
And then we can see the propaganda being ramped up here.
This is a repeat of one earlier, actually,
is it?
Brian, I think. But you can read it again
now people have seen the rest of it. Yeah, it won't hurt if we've already covered this one. The discreet, that's right, the discreet promotion of letters to the press through confidential brokers should be sharply increased. Well, we now get a better flavour of this one because we've covered.
It's worth putting up again.
The other material.
As I said, these letters written by the government officials were signed by MPs in a basement flat off Sloane Square, and that was Mr. Tucker's operation.
And then we come to the subject referendum,
right?
Which is very timely, isn't it? Because we're just about to head for another
one. Very important. Yeah.
You okay?
Getting a crampy. Anyway, excuse me, audience, if I slip back once in a while.
No.
Age is creeping up on me, I'm afraid.
No, you're doing a very fine job here, Dave. So
am I out of focus? Am I all right where I am?
Oh yeah, you're okay. That's fine.
Right. Most people seem to think, when I talk to them, that we had a referendum on going in. And this amazes me because there was no referendum to go in 1972. In fact, the government were absolutely dead scared of a referendum because you can see from the polls that we saw earlier that the British public did not want to join the common market. And if there had been a referendum, they'd have had to have had equal funding both sides. Not that wouldn't have stopped the pumping huge sums into the government campaign. So they did their utmost to prevent this referendum taking place, and they used the European movement. If you see here, it's called the British BCEM, which is the British. What does C stand for?
Well, the EM's definitely European movement.
Yeah, British. I just got a mental block at the moment.
Okay.
But it was known as the BCEM, but it's the European movement. So would in any case discredit anybody who promoted a referendum. So the European movement were being used as a grassroots movement to head off this referendum.
Right, and Mr. Goodhart here in this one is actually an MP, isn't he?
I think so, yes.
Right. So he's likely to pursue the idea of a referendum in his constituency, which is what an MP should be doing, is going where people want. And they say, if so, the BC European movement would in any case attempt to discredit it in advance.
That's right.
So this organisation is blatantly interfering in the constitution and constitutional matters, particularly MPs representing their own constituents. It's pretty incredible when you see this in this form.
This is not an honest campaign. It's not a campaign at all. It's just a bludgeoning the people into accepting a small minority of people's wishes.
Absolutely.
And these people are mostly led by large corporations and bankers. We'll see some more about that later. The next one is
misuse of money, isn't it? It's what we've done here.
The next one is another in the same line, showing the cooperation in the civil service producing speeches for MPs and opinion formers, and producing booklets and things.
Booklets, talking points, speeches, notes. So they weren't messing around. Every avenue of media in those days they were going for.
And the European movement was doing some of the work. It says ground prepared by the European movement in consultation with the Foreign Office departments. Now, consultation, you call this consultation? I call it collusion. Absolute.
Well, to suppress knowledge,
Yeah.
isn't it, is what's going on here. So this is the exact
So
opposite.
it's the wrong word to use, consultation. This is, by the way, from Anthony Royal's post-campaign report.
Right. And that was so important because they were gloating about how successful they'd been in
Well,
duping
yes,
the public.
because Anthony Royal had worked on a lot of the planning of this, and he was very proud of what he'd done. And the result of his efforts was that he was
Boasted.
well, he became Lord Fanshawe. He became elevated to the House of Lords, didn't he?
Right. And you've got another section from his report here, which is talking about how the European movement was crucial to the campaign with those government departments.
Yes. Regular contacts between ECIU, European Community Information Unit, okay, and the producers of major current affairs programs. So we've got the government directly colluding, I think I could say, with the media to get them to put their message across. Then you can see item 10 there, the physics section again. You can see the scale of the corruption. FCO's information department, administration department, launched a major program of 1,000 visits a year. We've been through this one, haven't we?
I think we have,
yeah.
but it doesn't
Doesn't hurt,
matter because
yeah.
we're seeing it against the
Yeah.
context of the other ones
But
now.
1,000 visits, that's a lot of visits, isn't it?
A lot of money.
A lot of money. Money's no object. You can't, no money for our manufacturing our space program, but money to send people to be propagandized. Plenty of that.
Right. And this is
No, we're sort of we're moving a
Deeper.
bit away from the we're going behind the scenes of it now.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
So, Mr. Rettinger,
I wonder how many people have heard of Joseph Rettinger.
a few, a few.
You'd heard of him.
Well,
yeah.
because I've read into some of this, and you've seen my timeline. So some people have, some haven't.
Well, this is another character who moved very quietly behind the scenes, working magic with his wand. During World War II, he was General Sikorski's right-hand man and travelled with Sikorsky everywhere. Sikorsky was the general who was leading the Polish government in exile and went around visiting Polish troops here. Well, I think there was a falling out between Rettinger and the general because I don't think Sikorsky was too keen on a united Europe after having been beaten up by the Germans. He wasn't very. Anyway, again, we can't prove anything, but Sikorsky died in an accident.
Gibraltar, I think you said.
Yes, his plane crashed into the sea and he was drowned, taken off from Gibraltar. And I can't remember the year. I think it was about 1943 or so. So this is the character who was responsible for founding the Bilderberg. Bilderberg movement. Nobody heard about Bilderberg until about 1976, when there was a scandal involving Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands over bribery, a Lockheed scandal. You know?
Yeah.
So he founded it, not Prince Bernhard. Prince Bernhard was
first chairman. I think.
was the first chairman, and he was put in there as the figurehead. But Rettinger was the man behind the scenes. Rettinger also was instrumental in getting the European movement up and running in 1948, liaising with the Americans to get funding for it through American Committee for United Europe.
Nice link there between the European movement and Bilderberg. And you've got this.
There's a third thing that Rettinger was responsible for, and that was founding the European Youth Movement. Now, the European Youth Movement was another propaganda arm. For instance, when there was a meeting in Europe of British ministers in the Labour government and other ministers abroad. They were sent as a rent-a-crowd to shout slogans. We want to join the European Union, that type of thing. So that was the sort of thing the European youth were doing.
And they're still targeting the youngsters now. Very
well,
much.
we don't know what everybody's doing today because 30-year-old hides all this stuff away.
Well,
but I suspect that it's worse now than it was then. And I urge people to send in FOI requests to tease out what they're doing urgently before the referendum. The next one is a picture of the first Bilderberg full meeting. Bilderberg started in 1952. It was set up in Paris with an inner circle of Rettinger and included Hugh Gaitskell and a few other bankers and so forth. But the first full meeting was in 1954. Now, it was held from 28th to the 31st of May 1954, and you can see the pictures of the delegates there. There's one or two interesting people. You can see there, top right-hand corner, looking very sceptical with his head on his hands and his arm, is Hugh Gaitskell. Interesting character. Standing up next to him on to the right is Bob Boothby.
That's the man with the two lamps above his head, which I think you'd see from.
Well, he finished up in disgrace for I don't want to mention it here, but
children or something, was it?
Yeah, something. He was into that sort of thing. And then you've got General Gubbins to Gaitskell's right. There, you can see it there. He was a famous general in SOE during the war. I don't know what he was doing there. But the interesting thing about Gaitskell is he became very sceptical of Bilderberg and stopped going to the meetings. I've got a lot of documentation from the Bilderberg meetings showing him sending his apologies month after month. So he sussed them out. Now we've got a section on the European movement itself.
Right.
And I think we skip through this fairly quickly. So
this diagram's important because this gives people a nice overview of it. So you've produced a hand drawing here.
By diligently looking through all the records, you can see how the money flowed. We have the European movement in the block down here towards the bottom, with its modus operandi, to propagandise the British public. And the European movement itself claims that without us, we would not be in the European Union. We would never have joined. And here we can see where the money came from. ACU, the American Committee for United Europe, which got its money from corporates and banks, plus the CIA giving grants to the European movement, so that's the down with him. The corporate entities were giving direct grants to the European movement as well. The Conservative government, through taxation money, was providing money to the European movement. The European Union didn't provide money as far as I can gather, but they did provide the propaganda material. So this was a foreign organisation being allowed by the British government to produce material to feed to the European movement, to feed to the public. Then on the left we have the Whitehall, that's civil service, writing pamphlets for the Conservative Group for Europe, who provided those pamphlets and money to the European movement. Now, to me, smells of corruption, gross corruption. I don't know what it smells to you.
Well, the word treason is in my mind at this stage. You start off through this and you say that this is deceitful, this is disgraceful, this is corruption, but actually when you see the intent, and the intent is to mislead the whole of the general public and undermine the Constitution, that's got to be treason, particularly as it's done behind closed doors.
Well, treason, could that be why they locked up all this stuff for 30 years, thinking that, well, I'll be old or dead by that time, so they won't be able to get me?
Absolutely. we did have the graph again here. Shall we skip
Yeah,
through?
the reason for the graph is just to show, reinforce
The
the
efforts.
idea that the propaganda
Was working.
works, a massive propaganda works massively, as you can see by this crossover.
So people looking at this one, if we just have a quick glimpse on screen, is think of what the polls are showing today as we move towards we move towards the referendum. But yeah, the propaganda is working. So you tell me how quickly you want to go through
Right.
these. This is
Then the next
more
one
money.
is, the first part is just showing the amount of money that was made available.
So-
Oodles of money was made available.
Campaign cost the government £461,400 and BCEM under 250,000. So a total of about 711,000. I think you've annotated there about 30 million, but in today's money, this is
Yeah, it says 20 there, but that was 10 years ago, so it's a lot more now. And the second part gives a list of the corporates who were involved in this propaganda campaign. First of all, we've got the Conservative Research Department and Political Centre.
which one's this one? Oh,
Yeah,
on the left.
yeah. So, the Conservative Party were using their facilities without presumably the knowledge of the grassroots membership to spend money on research and political activities. So that's corrupt.
And Chatham House is in there, of course. Chatham House.
Chatham House is a peculiar place, set up after the First World War, wasn't it? And its real name is Royal Institute for International Affairs. Did you know that?
Yes.
Now, why has it got the prefix Royal?
Well,
I wonder.
I can't answer that question.
So they were very active in propagandizing. PEP, I don't know who PEP is. Is it abbreviation for Pepsi Cola? I don't know. The National Farmers Union,
Yeah.
The Economist. Now we've got the bankers, Barclays Bank, Lloyds Bank, Westminster Bank. Just an interesting aside, Douglas Hurd, I believe, after he retired, he got a directorship with Westminster Bank.
Right. As you do.
As you do.
Yeah.
And he was chairman of the European movement for some years. And then we've got the European Community Information Office. That's the European, that's EEC, as it was then, or the EU as it is today, allowed to interfere in the campaign, as well as the European movement.
Right. And where are we here?
Well, we're coming back to
Yeah,
the pressure for a referendum. I mean, in actual fact, having a referendum on something that's unconstitutional as going into the common market is illegal and not right. But anyway, putting that aside, there were a lot of people who wanted a referendum at this time, and Anthony Wedgwood Tony Benn, was very keen for a referendum. He campaigned to have a referendum on this, and you can read here. He was called part of the anti-parliamentary tendency. Another one of these pejorative terms that was dreamt
So the
up.
top one is Ben. The anti-parliamentary tendency found expression in a movement fanned by Mr. Wedgwood Ben for a national referendum. And underneath it, you've got the reference to Mr. Goodhart again, where they're saying they'd attempt to discredit.
Yeah.
So anybody who is really they deem as a threat, they're going to get in and undermine them. Yeah.
The next one is a speech made by Douglas Jay. Douglas Jay was a Labour Party MP at the time, and father of Peter Jay, who used to present the Money programme on BBC. And this is a speech he made to Parliament on the 16th of February 1972 in the second reading of the ECA 72 bill. And he was talking about a referendum here. If you go to the second paragraph there and read that out.
It says the three other applicant countries are to hold referenda on the question of joining the community, and apparently, rightly in my opinion, the Prime Minister proposes one for Northern Ireland. nobody pretends that the government have any mandate for this bill from the people or anything approaching full-hearted consent.
Yeah. So we've got this contradiction where the government, the Conservative government, the Heath government, says if you want a referendum on Europe, inverted commas, then it's anti-parliamentary and it's beyond the pale. But if you want one for Northern Ireland, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's...
Can I just read the second one?
Yeah,
because I think this is pretty powerful.
Okay.
It says millions of people in this country will feel, as I do, that legislation passed in this way with no consent cannot command the assent of the country and would lack moral and constitutional validity. So the thing which grabs me there is that in has come constitutional. This thing is so serious, it's attacking the Constitution.
Yes.
And
Well, these
people
people recognised it.
Yeah.
But nowadays, they will tell you there is no constitution.
Yes.
Well, they will say it's a constitution. What they say now is that the constitution consists of the statutes that passed in Parliament. Now, so in other words, you've got politicians making up a constitution, which is rubbish.
Or more serious than that, in that you're well on the way to a dictatorship. So you've got these wonderful ladies, fantastic black and white photographs.
I'll leave you
showing
to explain this one.
well, all I was going to say, it was a fantastic photograph where people were trying to speak out,
the grassroots,
but their voice was never heard.
The grassroots people, and this was published in the press, this shows that the people were sharp on this, and they did want a referendum. They didn't want to be shoved into this dictatorship, this unaccountable body without the say-so of the people through a referendum. So I think that's very illustrative.
And it would be really interesting if we could jump back in time to see what those ladies would say if they could see the documents we're looking at now.
Somebody's probably still around. I mean, there's some young beauties there, aren't there? So perhaps this message, perhaps this video will get to these people, and they might come forward and
we'll
contact
see.
you.
We'll see.
Do you want to give away are people able to contact you?
Yeah, we're going to
yeah.
encourage people to do that anyway for the
All right.
for the CD at the end. Here, the next one we're putting up, this is the deceit again. EEC Information Unit produced extremely good material, but felt as a foreign organisation that it could not distribute it too widely, so they agreed the BCM should distribute units material under its own auspices. So this was deceit again.
Well, they knew they were acting. I don't know whether this is illegal what they were doing, but certainly deceitfully and against the public interest, to use the expression.
It's got to be misfeasance in public office, and the probability is malfeasance because they are
they knew that
money.
the European, the EEC, the Common Market should not be involved in as a foreign organisation in this campaign. So to get around that and hide it, they got the European movement, the grassroots organisation, to put the stuff about. They didn't do it themselves. They had enough money to pay, as you see the last paragraph, a direct mail organisation to do it.
Right.
I mean, it beggars belief when you read this stuff.
We can run through a couple of these because this one here, if we just do it, so we've got the EEC's London Information Office working closely with the European movement in promoting visits from this country to Brussels. A question and answer booklet was produced, and the IRD also wrote pamphlets for publication by the Conservative group. So now we see the deceit here at the heart of the Conservative, because the Conservative machinery was being used to deceive the British public over Europe.
Would you call this a fraudulent campaign?
Well,
what would you call it to really describe it?
Well, I believe what I'm looking at is the evidence for treason, because ultimately the attack was on the Constitution. So when I see the full picture, this isn't deceit. This is a calculated, orchestrated campaign to
Okay.
strip away the Constitution.
So
That is
where
treason.
does it leave our membership of the EU today, if this was the precursor of it? What
Well,
is
that's very easy, because if we just take what does the law say? The law says that when fraud is introduced in a case, everything that follows from that point is also fraudulent. So
does that mean our membership is illegal?
Well, it doesn't exist, I think, is a better way of putting it, because the whole thing was created on fraud.
So we're not actually in the European Union.
We only think we are.
We only think we are.
Yeah, we think we are because of the propaganda.
I think people who get to look at this would, I would like to see them giving their comments on how they see our membership today. Do they see it as this is just being history and everything's all right, or do they see our membership as being illegal or worse?
I think many people don't see anything because they're not getting they're still not getting the information. But probably what we've got to try and do is take all of this factual evidence, and we've got to put what's happening today alongside it so that we can see both.
Yeah.
I think I can just move on through a couple of these. So we've got an advertising campaign here. Corporate members of the movement were asked to assist by including an EEC element in their own advertising. The Times and British Leyland in particular produced a number of adverts with an EEC content. Ironic, isn't it, that British Leyland eventually gets slaughtered by European
They're signing
companies.
their own death. But wasn't British Leyland a state entity?
Well, it became a state
agency.
Yeah.
So wasn't that illegal? When did they become British Leyland become taken over by nationalised by the government?
I can't say. I'd need to do some research
yeah.
on that, but I take your point. The movement's advertising campaign reached its climax in the period July to October 1971.
We've seen the next one too.
And then we got letters to the public and also drafted the replies to over 2,000 letters.
We've seen that before, but that's good to reiterate it.
Well, the scale of it. And here we're back on the secret document here, Anthony Royal's post-campaign report. Of other elements of the campaign, advertising in the national and local press, including articles and lists of prominent supporters, was generally agreed to have been very effective. Their poster and sticker advertising was perhaps less so. Their conferences, seminars, rallies, mobile vans, anti-referenda and other activities all made their contribution. I'm sure it would have said useful. Yeah. So, yeah. That all going on. And the twinning now starting to drill this down into local communities level, isn't it? So this one here, no stone was left unturned. Even the fledgling town twinning movement was to be used as it is still being used to this day. And £6 million for that, popping out of somewhere.
£6 million, I'll put this one up to show the scale of the operation. £6 million a day, if you multiply that by 20, you're good at maths, £180 million spent on the twinning movement, which had been...
Vast sums of money.
Which had become taken over by the government, a perfectly bona fide organisation co-opted to do the government's bidding. Just as a matter of an aside there, one of the requirements to be set up as a twinning association was you had to swear the leader, the local mayor who was running it, the British mayor, had to swear an oath of allegiance to the European Union. Did you know that?
I didn't.
I've got the documents on that.
So British mayors who were going to Europe on a twinning trip, which was what I know is a lot of champagne and wine and good times and good food.
Yep.
And then they have to swear allegiance.
Yeah. I don't know whether they're doing it today. I'm talking about. Still got the papers from early 2000s, so I don't know whether they stopped that or not.
Yeah. What has come into my mind a couple of times while you're doing this, Dave, is that is in this period while this is going on, I was at sea with the Royal Navy, believing that I was helping to defend my country from all threats. while what was going on in the background was treason by British MPs.
They're probably laughing up their sleeve at you.
I don't think, I'm going to say I don't think they're laughing quite as much as they were, because as Mike pointed out in the news today, there are signs that they're getting a little bit wobbly. They want to get closer to us. They think that people are getting too suspicious of politicians. They don't think we love them. And we don't love bankers, but we've got
the state today, whereas we can see this through all the cameras. We're the camera capital of the world, are we?
Yeah.
Hidden cameras, speed limits, speed cameras everywhere. It's very difficult to concentrate on your driving now. You have to spend all your time thinking about
variable
speed cameras,
and
they change the speed limit over a very short distance. And if you're not concentrating on speed cameras, you can easily get a ticket. And if you're concentrating solely on speed cameras, are you concentrating on your driving properly?
Well, you're not.
I don't think so.
Right, now the next section is parliamentary speeches. So I think you need to take us through these.
I just thought we should have a quick flavour of what went on in Parliament. As I say, if you want the full whack, it's on here, and it's described in here. But we've got a speech by, we've seen him before, Neil Martin, MP for Banbury, which included my constituency, Witney, at the time. And he's talking about the whisper that Ted Heath was going to resign as Prime Minister and take the country, go to the country for a general election if he didn't win the second reading, which was the most critical reading of the three. If you read his bit in green, I'd appreciate that.
Then there is the vital matter of the pledge given by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Prime Minister, during the last election on the 2nd of June 1970 and in Paris before then, about not joining the common market without the full-hearted consent of Parliament and the people.
Yeah, so he was pointing out that this was supposed to be a fair campaign and the people were going to be properly informed and they're going to make an informed decision about what they wanted. But they never got the chance anyway, and Parliament was bludgeoned in by what you've got to know about parliamentarians or MPs is they depend. They like their job. They
get comfortable,
fairly well paid. There's lots of lands, lots of trips. Nowadays they don't have to stay up late like they used to. You see Parliament empty quite a lot of the time. But anyway, in those times, to lose their seat was quite a big thing. So that must have persuaded quite a few of the MPs to go against their natural instincts and vote to join common market. And we realise, even with this threat, Heath only won the vote by 8 votes. Is that wholehearted consent? Then we come to the next one in the same theme. This is Ted Heath actually declaring that he's going to go to the country and wind up Parliament and have a general election.
These words are from Heath himself here. Okay, shall I read it very quickly?
Hang on a minute, I got that wrong, I think.
Was it? The inference
it's the one after. It's the one after. Who wrote this?
Somebody who was critical.
Yeah.
It would appear.
Is it worth reading? Just anyway, it's a good speech. The Solicitor General was Geoffrey Howe. Yes, if you read that out,
I'll read it because this really says what the problem is, isn't it? Our sovereignty cannot be bartered away by the Solicitor General or even the Prime Minister, because it is not theirs to give. I speak not only of the sovereignty of this House, but also the higher sovereignty of the British people. It is suggested that the Prime Minister may say tonight that he will resign if he is unable to carry this bill, His reason for saying this would be that his European commitment is crucial to his policies as a whole. If he had said that at the general election, he would have been the vanquished, not the victor. He would not have been Prime Minister today. This is a policy which has never been endorsed by the British people. That really says it. Whoever said it, it says it.
So the rumours are spreading, and the next slide shows these rumours were correct.
Right. So
this is Heath speaking.
So he says, my colleagues and I are unanimous that in these circumstances, this Parliament cannot sensibly continue. So he's putting the pressure on everybody there.
Yeah.
And
so that's worth another 10% vote, I would think, from his party.
Okay, I'll just pop that one up as well, because this is Mr. Wilson.
Well, this
is powerful.
This is after the vote.
Yeah.
And the vote is by just 8 votes. They voted to accept the second reading to go into the Common Market, ECA 72. So Mr. Wilson is pretty scathing. And remember, Wilson wasn't, according to Tony Benn, he told me at a meeting that Wilson didn't really want to join the Common Market, but this is what he said after the vote.
So Mr. Wilson says, the first is that in breach of his election promise, the Prime Minister has not got the full-hearted consent of the British people. Secondly, he has not got the full-hearted consent of Parliament.
Might as well read the third one as well.
Thirdly, when he said he must get this through on Tory votes in a majority of this House, he's not done so. So Wilson was really hitting him with a big stick there to say that
this is not a victory for the Common Market.
So we're just going to come back on the subject of rockets, and this says it all. Who destroys Britain's space program? So this is this business. It wasn't just the propaganda going on. We also had skullduggery over Britain's industry and technical capability. So what was going on here?
Well, to me, this shows a sort of mindset amongst Conservatives. I don't know how I should say this, but I think a lot of the Conservative MPs at that time had been studied Greek, Latin, those sort of things, and technology was a bit of a mumbo jumbo to them.
Mystery.
And so they didn't seem to have sympathy with engineers. I is one,
Yeah.
And I think you're an engineer, aren't you?
No, I'm not an engineer.
Well, you
no.
were yeah.
I was a seaman.
You were technical though, weren't you? So this is an example of not backing Britain's technology. In 1960, we had a very good rocket called Blue Streak, which was capable of launching large satellites and missiles, of course, and was very successful and would have been taken us into space. We could have been, if not level with the Americans, we could certainly been number 2 in the world, well in the game. But Conservative government cancelled it in 1960. Why? I don't know. Then we had, at the time of our Heath trying to get into the European Union, we had another rocket started by Wilson in 1976 called Black Arrow, and this was designed to be we were short of money, it seems, at the time. I don't know why we were short of money at the time, but the economy was the name of the game, and Wilson said, we'll keep space going with this Black Arrow rocket, smaller than Blue Streak, keep us in the game. And this was cancelled in 1971, and I have a whole chapter on that subject there, and I think the conclusion is that this rocket was cancelled and to appease the French. I mean, Heath was desperate to get into the European
and the French saw it as too big a challenge to their.
Well, they had their own rocket program, and I believe Heath agreed to cancel it in exchange, together with fisheries and common agricultural policy, to cancel the program to allow, the evidence is pretty conclusive in my book, I think, and that was cancelled as the final sort of giveaway to allow us into the and 2 days after the meeting in Paris, Let's put it in context. The meeting with Pompidou, with Heath and Pompidou, was on the Thursday and Friday. Heath came back to Britain on the Friday night. Monday morning, Black Arrow was cancelled.
Well, there we are, an incredible interview with Dave Barmby about what took place around Britain's entry into the European Economic Community back in 1972-73. And of course, he's also pointing out the undermining of Britain's industry. Black Arrow there cancelled along with other projects. And if we reflect as to what's happened over the past years in Britain, of course, we've seen much of our major industry cut away in order to weaken the power of Britain as a nation state. Well, I'm going to encourage people to get hold of a copy of Dave Barmby's book. Here it is, The EU, a Corporatist Racket. And the key thing about this book is it is full of evidence. It is the documents, it's the statements, it's excerpts from the speeches which people gave at the time. And this forms a comprehensive base of evidence showing that the whole of that 1972 process was rigged. And I think that we can see parallels rapidly unfolding for the forthcoming EU referendum. So if you'd like to get hold of a copy of that book, you can go through the UK Column website and order it. We're just providing the service so that you can get hold of it easily. £9.99. It is a fantastic book, and anybody who is interested in what is taking place about the referendum and indeed what the European Union really is needs to get hold of a copy. We're going to be continuing to report on the EU and the corporatist racket that it is. And one of the things that we'll be looking at is comparisons between activities taking place back in 1971, 72, 73, and what is now happening in 2016 to drive Britain into the hands of the EU super state, the project as it was called. Thank you for joining us today. Stay posted for further reports from UK Column. Goodbye.